My name is Rebecca Snyder, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association. And we'll be recording this session. It's also being live streamed on the MDDC News Facebook page. And as we're recording it, it will also be distilled down for a podcast episode on MDDC's podcast, 5 Dubs. And the episode will be available next week, just in time for the hearing on House Bill 183. So Maryland's Public Information Act was first enacted in 1970 and grants the public a broad right of access to public records while protecting legitimate governmental interests and the privacy right of individual citizens. So any record a government or public body creates, with certain exceptions, is accessible to the public. And we're here today to discuss the accessibility of government information and what the next steps are to ensure more equitable access. So I'm going to introduce our panel in alphabetical order. So we have Joanne Antoine, who is the Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland. And Joanne joined Common Cause back in January of 2017, managing state outreach and engagement for key policy campaigns, specifically around money in politics and voting rights. She now serves as Executive Director, where she is responsible for creating and implementing the Maryland organization's policy campaigns and building its capacity. Prior to joining Common Cause, Joanne worked for the Democracy Initiative, where she helped engage local and national organizations in the coalitions and campaigns in Maryland. She's also worked as an organizer, trainer, and strategist for numerous campaigns in the US and Haiti. Deb Gardner is the legal director of the Public Justice Center. Deb joined the PJC as its legal director in January of 2000. Since then, she has participated in a wide range of impact litigation and other advocacy. Among her other responsibilities at the PJC, she directs the Appellate Advocacy Project, co-founded the Race Equity Project, and participates in the Race Equity Team. She works through national and Maryland networks to advance a race equity focus and analysis in the delivery of legal services and the practice of public interest law. Before joining the PJC, Deb worked in poverty law at the Maryland Legal Aid for over 15 years. Lisa Kirschner is the Public Access Ombuds. She was appointed by the Maryland Attorney General to a 4-year term, and she is the first Public Access Ombudsman. The office opened in March of 2016, and she was reappointed to a second term in March of 2020. Lisa's primary activity has been to help PIA requesters and responding agencies resolve PIA issues voluntarily through constructive dialogue and practical problem solving. She's a longtime resident of Maryland, a Maryland lawyer, and a graduate of the University of Maryland College Park and the University of Maryland School of Law. Delegate Brooke Lierman represents District 46 in Baltimore City and serves in Maryland's House of Delegates. She was first elected in 2014 and sits on the Environment and Transportation Committee. She is the sponsor of House Bill 183, Equitable Access to Government Information, and a candidate for Maryland's Comptroller. And finally, but certainly not least, we have Senator Cheryl Kagan, who serves in Maryland's State Senate as the senator from Rockville and Gaithersburg, which is District 17. She was a member of the House of Delegates from 1995 to 2003 and first elected to the Maryland Senate in 2014. She is the vice chair of the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee and is the sponsor of Senate Bill 244, Equitable Access to Government Information. So that was a lot, but thank you all so much for joining us. I do want to note, just in terms of housekeeping, Senator Kagan has another commitment at 10:30, so if she dashes off, it is not a worry. She is very committed to this issue. Just scheduling is life right now. So people's interest in government information, I was talking to Lisa about this a couple days ago. Really, their interest in the information accessible to them is a window into what is important to people. It showcases also the effect that government actions have on people's lives. Now, we all know there are barriers to access. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's money, knowledge, it could be a whole host of things. And all too often the public, and by extension, journalists who stand in for the public, are left out with limited options when their requests for information are denied by records custodians. So I want to start us off, and Joanne, I'm going to look to you to start the discussion on this. But I know each of you hears from individuals and groups about barriers to equitable access. So what do you think gets in the way of people's access to government information?
Yeah, thank you to Rebecca for having me on today, and thank you to Senator Kagan and Delegate Lierman for continuing to be our champions for democracy in Annapolis, and for working to create greater equity in the PIA process. You know, we a lot of times host, I call them small organizing meetings, or just in our, events that we're having with the public. And I think when we're, thinking about access to government information, we don't realize how average everyday Marylanders don't realize that this is a right? A lot of times I'm telling folks that anybody, like anyone, can make a request for information, right? All you have to do is look for the point person in your county, or, depending on the agency where you're requesting information. But I think a lot of times the process, once they've realized that it is a right, it's intimidating. People don't like interacting with government entities. And again, that's for varying reasons. A lot of times people don't even know who their elected leaders are. So I think there's continues to be this learning curve of helping people understand, one, that this is a right. Two, here's how to go about navigating the PIA process, and being proactive, providing them with things like templates, on the request document, if it's something that they have to type up, in jurisdictions where there isn't a form, or where you can't just make a call. But I think just remembering overall that people, a lot of folks just don't like interacting with the government at all, and that the process can be intimidating even after the individual finds out that it is a right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what does everyone else think? Senator, I know you're about to you only are with us for a short time. What do you hear from your constituents?
Well, this is a lot of times we talk about government policy and it goes over people's head because it's an anecdote or a theory. I can tell you that it's real life, that when people want to find out what's going on in their community, in their neighborhood, in their county, or on an issue they care about, they should not have to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars and get the runaround. We need press to have access to information about government. We need average people to be able to access it. Part of that is going to be addressed by this bill, and I thank Delegate Lierman, as always, for her leadership and partnership, and for all you wonderful advocates, because we need to get this done. The other piece of it is making government more transparent from the beginning, and Delegate Corman and I have been working and enacting laws every year to allow more sunshine. So hopefully there will be less of a burden on our ombudsmen, our hardworking local government employees, to have to dig out documents because they'll already be available online.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. And Senator Kagan has really been leading on this for many years. And, one of the things that I really appreciate about this legislation is the mandate that we will be in a stance of proactive disclosure, right? That going forward, it is on our government, our norm is to be proactively disclosing information, right? When there's information, and we're able to do that more now because we have websites. And so all of those local governments or state agencies that are able and have the ability to put that report that they just published, just put it on their website rather than making the public ask for it, right? I think also, I'll just add to echo what everybody has said, that right now, we're in a moment where we need to be restoring faith in government to people around the state of Maryland and the country. And one of the best ways to restore faith in government is to make sure that people can see in and see what's going on and really understand the processes and understand the decision making. And that means transparency. And so this bill and making sure that everybody is able to see what's going on and to understand it better. And that's what this bill and other bills that, Senator Kagan and I and others have been working on, to make sure that people understand that, yes, this is your government. These are your reports that we're working on. These are your, decisions affecting your lives that we're making and that agencies are making, and you have the right, not only the right to know about it, but we're going to give you access to this information. So that's why I think it's so important. We all believe in, at Senator Kagan and I, we ran for office because we believe in government as being part of the solution. And that means that making sure that we are being transparent and providing equitable access to the decisions that are being made each and every day.
Deb, did you want to, I'm sorry, Deb, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
I do, and I so appreciate hearing our legislators reinforce the fact that this is our government. It's so important. It's such an important message. And candidly, not everyone in state, county, and local government agencies has that same approach. And I think one of the things that's important about this bill is that it can go a long way to change that culture by providing for proactive disclosures of a lot of commonly requested records and the kind of information that members of the public want to have about the government. But also by giving people, individual people and small organizations, access to the PIA Compliance Board and to Ms. Kirschner's office for dispute resolution. My organization, which is a public interest organization, recently filed 40 PIA requests, one each with a variety of local government organizations around Maryland. And I will tell you that only 5 of the 40 complied with the law. 5 of the 40 complied with the law. And 58% of them completely ignored the requests as though we'd never made them. And so it's important for individual folks. Some of our client communities would like to have access to information. Their requests are also routinely ignored. And yet, according to the law, you don't even have to mention the Public Information Act in order for your request to be a Public Information Act request, but I guarantee if you don't, it's likely to be ignored. And you don't have to say why you want the information, but a lot of agencies immediately get a little bit defensive and don't really want to help you get information, get access to your government. And that's why I think this bill moves us significantly in the right direction.
Rebecca, if I could follow up on what Debra just said. Again, this is not a hypothetical. Last summer, the State Board of Elections was not in compliance with transparency, even during a pandemic. And I encouraged and I wheedled and I reminded, and finally I filed a complaint with the Open Meetings Compliance Board. I shouldn't have to do that. No one should have to do that to get an agency to comply with the law. I filed it with Delegate Corman as my partner on that. And it took weeks to get them to act, to contact the State Board of Elections, weeks longer for the state board to respond. And first off, this was an election year where critically important decisions about our democracy were being made at every single meeting. And ultimately, the State Board of Election allowed as how they weren't in compliance. I was right, but it turns out through some weird bureaucratic legal maneuver, they are not covered under the Open Meetings Compliance Board jurisdiction. And so they said, yeah, you're right, we're not doing it that way, but we don't have to. That's crazy. So we need to fix things like that to make sure that our democracy is conducted in public whenever possible.
And I'm so glad you're batting cleanup on that. And I think that bill is being heard even today. Is that Senate Bill 72, right?
Yep.
So thank you for the plug there. I wanted to go back to something that Deb said, primarily about how it feels like it's almost inside baseball. You have to know the right words to say and whatnot in order to sometimes access that information. And so I want to hear a little bit more about what it's like for regular people to access. And Lisa, we've got a treasure trove of knowledge here with Lisa Kirschner, who is Maryland's first public access ombudsman.
Yeah. Well, it is, first of all, so true that people expect to get information, meaningful information from their government in a timely way. And as Senator Kagan was pointing out, timeliness really matters. In many, many situations, it's absolutely critical. And now that we are, squarely in the digital age, the public expects government agencies to be operating in the 21st century. So this does mean things like having proactive disclosure on a website, or knowing what documents you have readily available, or knowing what documents you have produced last week and which do not have to be re-reviewed. The important part of the importance of this is people can no longer just call up an agency, get a live body on the other end of the line and ask a question. That almost doesn't exist anymore. Everything has to be done by typing out emails or writing, letters, and which is it's a wonderful tool, but it's much more cumbersome. So tools like proactive disclosure, swift responses, having trained personnel who know what is required and how to meet some of these challenges is just absolutely critical. And if we don't do it, if we don't have it, I think we are really opening the door for an environment of disinformation to flourish. We are inviting that. If we do not provide information, records, and facts and make those things available, there will be others who will fill the void, and it won't be necessarily reality-based.
Great point.
That is a great point. And I'm interested in this kind of, not tension, but this idea of proactive disclosure. And coming from the media side of things, I, of course, love proactive disclosure. And I think that that public bodies should be making their reports accessible as much as possible. But I think when you're talking on a very individual level, and certainly in Deb's work, she's working with people who are trying to get their individual records. And oftentimes that specific proactive disclosure is like a needle in a haystack. You can be flooded with information and say, oh, well, it's on the internet, go look it up. You can find it. But oftentimes it's the specific request for information that gets you what you're looking for. And I'd like to hear from our panelists just sort of the efficacy of proactive disclosure versus those targeted requests.
I'm happy to talk about that for a second. So I think you're right. There's different kinds of requests and different kinds of information that the government and agencies and local governments are creating all the time, right? On the one hand, there's the reports that we're making. Sometimes they're legislatively mandated. Sometimes they're federally mandated reports. Sometimes they're states just to keep up with ongoing compliance. One good example is the Maryland Department of Environment. When I was on the Appropriations Committee, we were very frustrated with the lack of enforcement of our clean water and clean air laws that were happening. And so we required them to do quarterly enforcement reports telling us what they were actually, whether they were actually enforcing our laws. They wouldn't put them online. So we had to go request each report as it came. They have just this year started putting their annual and quarterly enforcement reports online. That's proactive disclosure, right? Not making Chesapeake Bay Legal Alliance or League of Conservation Voters Funds ask every quarter for their enforcement report, right? But just saying, hey, we do this every year, we do this every quarter, we're just gonna start putting them online so anybody has access to seeing the kinds of enforcement that we're doing. Another kind of record, which of course Deb was talking about, is records that pertain to a situation I personally was in, or that maybe affect my neighborhood, records that wouldn't be necessary, a series of emails perhaps that, transpired about, between two people in the government. Those kinds of records are not going to be proactively disclosed, but there needs to be a way to have access to them in a way that's easier for our local governments to access, and in a way that lowers the barrier for people. And this bill, for the very first time, says, okay, we have this great compliance board, we have this great ombudsman, And let's make sure that we're using them to their fullest capacity to have an administrative method rather than forcing people to go to the court system, right? That saves the custodians time and effort, and it saves the public time and effort. And it makes sure that we're actually using the compliance board that we set up with a few years ago, and Lisa, you know, this great ombudsman and her staff, to the fullest effect so that everybody benefits. And I think that's why the two really important components of this bill.
If I could just add on to Delegate Lierman, which is, we're talking about transparency, we're talking about access, and we're talking about timely and affordable. So it's not just that, yeah, we'll get it to you and we're happy to work with you, but turnaround time is important, and not trying to soak the activist or resident who wants the information with bills for hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a few documents.
Yeah, great point.
I want to get back to some of those barriers, because, you know, it sounds in theory so wonderful. Like everyone has access, and you can just go and you might have to know some special language, but you can get the information that you're wanting. Could you all talk about what it's like when requests are not granted? So I know from the media standpoint, of course, in Maryland, you have 30 days to respond to a request. Oftentimes, you know, custodians, for a variety of reasons, don't get to that request till the end of that 30-day period and then say, oh, but we can't fill that. So can you all talk about what it's like and where people can go if their requests are denied now?
Well, I can jump in on this because this is my bailiwick. When people's requests are denied, for example, under exemptions or sometimes without even giving a reason, their only option really is to come to me. They can go to court, but going to court requires hiring lawyers. It requires having the time and energy to devote to getting a hold of records. And this is, as a practical matter, is a process that is quite out of reach of most people and even of most businesses. So as a practical matter, their option is to come to my office. And what I experience really with requesters on a daily basis is a very, very high degree of frustration. Frustration that they're not getting information and records. They don't understand why, oftentimes. And they're in a position of being told constantly to wait or you're not going to get it. So in some instances, I'm able to help translate legal exemptions that may be claimed, or help a requester to reframe a request in some instances. But in many instances, and I would say we took a very detailed look at this a couple of times, once in 2016 and again in 2019, a couple of the effects of not getting these things resolved and not having a remedy are that requesters will start to, the dispute will proliferate, it will mushroom. People will start submitting more and more requests simply in an effort to get the records and the information they want. They don't know what else, they really have no other viable avenue. Another effect is that the resentment and the frustration grows and builds and can in some instances really take on a life of its own. I can tell you that I hear quite often from people that they don't have confidence in government, that they do not trust the information they are getting, that they do not know where to turn to get it. And if you tell somebody you have to go to court to get it, you may as well, for the most part, be telling them to catch a rocket to the moon. Mm-hmm. So without clear, accessible, user-friendly pathways, we are really shutting down a large number of people from getting reliable information, accurate and reliable information about what their government is up to. And we know what happens when that happens. Right. Bad things start to happen.
So Lisa, just for people following along, can you briefly tell us how the average person knows how to access your service? I know you have a website. You want to give a little shout out to your service?
Sure. I have a Twitter feed, which is managed by my marvelous administrator. We have a website, and my administrator does a lot of work on that. But primarily, my customers come to me because agencies, when they deny a request, or if they are charging fees, are referring them to me. They're saying, if you don't like this outcome, you can call the ombudsman or you can go to court. And that is happening, while not uniformly, it's happening pretty regularly. So I get a lot of customers directly from that route. And then also word of mouth. We spend a lot of time doing outreach. We go out to community group. We're doing it all virtually now, of course, but I would say before the pandemic, we'd go out anywhere from once, twice, 3 times a month to address and do trainings for both government agencies and advocacy organizations. So word gets around. We've now been up and running almost 5 years. And so we have, we have a core group of customers who come back to us, and we're always seeing new customers coming in.
People love Lisa.
Yeah, right. Lisa is awesome. But Lisa, when you choose the word customers, can you just clarify to anyone watching, is there a fee for your service?
There's no fee.
Okay, so there's
no fee. I use the word customer just to simply reflect they're not my clients in the same way that a lawyer would have a client. So I serve all comers.
Yeah, it's just important for people to know that they have free access to this.
It's free access. There are no fees whatsoever to talk to me or to utilize the services in my office.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I'm going to turn to Joanne from Common Cause in just a second and ask more about how the barriers that we've talked about affect people's lives. But I'm just being mindful of time, and I know that Senator Kagan has another commitment. So I wanted to offer you the opportunity, Senators, to close your section out and say anything you like.
Thank you. I'm good. I think you guys are doing such important work. I look forward to partnering with you and to hopefully getting this done and signed into law.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I'll listen to the first minute or two of Joanne, and then I will bid you adieu.
Okay, so Joanne, you're on the spot. We've heard a lot about timing issues, money issues, but what does that mean in a very real sense to people who are trying to access information? How do those barriers affect people's lives?
Yeah, I mean, Lisa really already touched on it, right? I think what we end up with is Marylanders, not having faith in this process that was set to work for them, right? I think when we get calls, and honestly, it's usually once a week, or, if we send out a transparency email, that's when responses flood in, right? From people who are honestly just frustrated with the process, right? And a lot of them aren't aware that we have an ombuds, right? So we will pass them on to Lisa, I said Lisa,
Please
sorry.
do.
Lisa, and I will try and assist where I can, but what I'm finding is I'm not even confident that a lot of them are even reaching out to her. They've just kind of, gotten frustrated with the process entirely. I've had people tell me that it's been 30 days, right? I haven't heard from this, the custodian of records at all. Am I reaching out to the wrong person? They'll send me their PIA requests so that I can improve it, right? And a lot of times I'm just adding language that says that this is a PIA request. I'll add some Common Cause fluttery language in there too to assist where I can. But I think people just don't, they end up not getting the request to the information that they need. And in a lot of instances, it is I'd say very critical info, right? One example, and she might even be on today because I sent her this event, right? She is always reaching out because she's been trying to get records, on information regarding a death in her family, right? She's been trying to get the records of, I guess it's his, what would you call it? After you passed away, the test. Yes, and all the materials around that case. And she's been trying to navigate the process for years, it seems. I've run into her at events, and Lisa, I'm sure she's reached out to you, but this is just an example where, in this instance, she really needs the information in order to just get closure, for her family. And, she hasn't been able to get the response that she needs at all.
So Joanne, do feel free to refer this person or anyone else who has similar problems to me. I wish I could say that the problems you're describing are aberrational, but they're not. I mean, in the nearly 5 years we've been up and running, I would say anywhere from 20% to a full quarter of my caseload consists of requests that receive no response at all. Zero. More than 30 days has gone by, and it is though the requests were dropped in a black hole. You know, no one knows what happened to it. So, you know, those matters, we actually have a fairly high success rate in resolving, because there's really no issue there, legal issue there. Agencies are required to respond. It's usually a matter of tracking down the right people and bringing it to their attention, and then following up. So it shouldn't be that difficult. It should not be that difficult, but unfortunately it is. This is one of the ways lack of having an enforcement remedy really, it hurts my program and it hurts the public, because if there was an accessible remedy, I guarantee you this rate of no response would immediately drop.
Well, and I want to get back to that rate of no response and also the timing issue, because I hear from often that agencies especially will say, oh, you know, our budget doesn't allow us to have a quick turnaround, or there's all sorts of reasons why they can't have the kind of turnaround that's required by law. But I know that timing really affects individuals. And Deb, I want to turn to you, because your kind of constituent population really, you know, they're looking for information about their own cases, and oftentimes there is a timing component. Could you speak a little bit to what the effects are when things are delayed?
Well, I think timing is an important issue across the board, whether an individual is seeking records about something that they were directly involved in. They are a person in interest, as it's called under the statute, or even public interest organizations and members of the press. Obviously, when we make a request for information, it's often for a time-sensitive reason, for example, preparing for the legislative session. And it's very frustrating when you make requests of government agencies months before the legislative session, and then you still have to pivot to some other strategy come the legislative session because you did not get the information to which you were entitled. That's extraordinarily frustrating. And unfortunately, I do want to say there are wonderful folks in government in Maryland who take the Public Information Act seriously, who respond in a timely way, who do their jobs, who understand that public access is a part of their job. But there are many who just don't consider it important, agencies aren't organized around complying with the act. And there are folks in government, unfortunately, who want to obstruct access to government information. And frankly, timing is one of their best friends, because this is, you know, justice delayed is justice denied, and the same is true with public access to information.
Mm-hmm. Certainly on a journalism aspect, you know, if you wait so long, the story's not there any longer. So it really, you know, running out the clock is extraordinarily detrimental on a lot of different levels. I want to reserve some time for questions. And so we are here because there's pending legislation that will help take us a step further towards equitable access to government information. And as our bill sponsor, Delegate Lierman, would you walk us through what House Bill 183, Senate Bill 244 would do to help?
Sure, of course, yeah. So, you know, what I said before, this bill is really a critical change to keep Maryland's public records, or to make Maryland's public records more accessible and more transparent. And it really builds on the successful implementation of the Public Information Act Compliance Board and Ombudsman programs that were begun in 2015. I'm losing years now. In 2019, we on the Appropriations Committee created inserted budget language, working with our colleagues in the Budget and Taxation Committee in the budget to ask Lisa to do a report on how things were going, you know, and look at agency compliance, look at how many agencies were getting requests, how long it was taking to fulfill them, and to give us her recommendations and the Compliance Board recommendations on how to strengthen our PIA and transparency. So they created a wonderful report. It came out in December of 2019. And that report really detailed some interesting and important ideas for how to strengthen and build on the work that we have already done here in Maryland. And that's what this bill is. It increases the jurisdiction of the compliance board's review, and it issues opinions to include, denials of inspections, fee waivers, and timely response, and it lowers the floor for fee disputes as well. It also continues to issue, it says that the board will also continue to issue written opinions, which have been really helpful in clarifying the law around this. It also authorizes the board to order custodians to rectify violations, including waiving fees, and it requires proactive disclosure of public records to save custodians, ultimately, to save them time and effort in fulfilling commonly requested items and annual reports on request received. So, it also looks at bumping up some of the staffing levels to supporting the board and supporting our PIA as well, because we want to make sure that those individuals have the support they need to access and to work with the public and with the agencies and with the custodians of records that are being requested. So it really builds on the work that we've already done in a way that will ultimately really benefit Marylanders and benefit Maryland's governments. We've worked really hard with MACO and MML and agencies representing some of our local governments to make sure that this is something that can be done in an equitable way, and that won't be too much of a burden, but will in fact help our agencies and help our local governments fulfill these requests and be more transparent and work with their constituents.
Wonderful. Well, and just a little plug for everyone listening. The first hearing on this set of bills is going to be next Thursday. That's February 11th in the House Government Operations, Health and Government Operations Committee. And we will be, I know Common Cause is working on this, Marylanders for Open Government, the Press Association and many other advocates are looking to this hearing to share information with our legislators about that. And I would urge everyone who's interested in this issue to contact their legislators. I want to open us up for questions, and thank you to our panelists. But as we're kind of winding down, what questions do our attendees have for our panelists? While you're all thinking and using the Q&A button to do that, we heard earlier more about sort of long-term or proactive legislation or steps. One of our attendees asks, agencies often talk about that they don't have the budget to fulfill requests in a timely manner. And so is there legislation or is there a solution to that complication? And I know, Lisa, I'm kind of looking at you because records management is a big piece of what you see, I think, as part of this puzzle. Do you want to take that?
Sure. I do think there's a very, very close connection between efficiency in records management and efficiency in responding to requests for records. If you cannot reliably identify your own records, know where they are, and efficiently retrieve them, you are not going to be able to handle Public Information Act requests very efficiently. Chances are your general operations are not going to be going as smoothly as they could either. I mean, the reasons to get a good handle on record management are manyfold. The PIA is just one of them. And I think that virtually all of state and local government would benefit immensely from, for example, taking trainings through state archives on records management, keeping record retention schedules up to date, having staff trained in those matters, and maximizing tools like proactive disclosure. When you proactively disclose something, it means just what it sounds like. You are making something available before it is even requested. That means when you get the request, you don't have to do any additional work. It's already up on your website. Or if particular records are kind of a hot topic at the moment and you're getting multiple requests for them, as has happened, for example, during the pandemic, where I see tons of requests that have to do with asking for state data about testing and vaccinations and healthcare delivery. If you know these are in the public eye, you can focus on that and devote your resources to making them available in a very efficient way. So in a way, I see this bill, while it certainly serves transparency in government and the Public Information Act process, it is also an encouragement to agencies to take a look more broadly at their record management. When we talk about costs, I mean, there are a couple of things that are important here. One is there are no new duties under the Public Information Act created by this law other than to self-report, to track one's own caseload, and to report certain aspects of it, about it. My office has helped a number of agencies, for example, develop spreadsheets that can do this. This is not really rocket science. You can do it with an Excel spreadsheet. Moreover, if you're not tracking your cases, it'd be very hard to know that you are complying. So, I mean, unless you have truly a de minimis number, you're just not going to know. So I think that many of the measures that this bill is calling for, the proactive disclosure, the publication of caseload data, are really basic steps that will help agencies get on top of their own records and on top of their own caseload and manage it much more efficiently. I think it's unfortunately maybe human nature a little bit that unless you tell somebody we have an expectation that you will do this, it won't be prioritized. Mm-hmm. It won't happen. It will be lost in the shuffle. And I think that's what, to a large extent, what we see across state and local government, a great deal of variability in how much agencies do to manage their own records and caseloads.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Anyone else want to chime in? Is there a legislative solution for time?
Look, I think a lot of this depends on how agencies, well, let me back up. Our agencies are severely understaffed, right? For the past 10 years and longer, we have not provided the funding that the governor, whoever he is, hasn't provided adequate funding for our agencies. So we see basically every state agency at this point is understaffed, from DPSCS to NDE, right? And that has real consequences for delivering services to constituents, especially during a pandemic, right? It also has consequences on things like response time to the Public Information Act. We need to be getting to a place where our agencies are healthily staffed and have the people who can do what needs to be done to fulfill those agencies' missions. I know that it's sometimes, politically popular to claim there's all this waste, fraud, and abuse, but the truth is that happens sometimes, but by and large, we are severely understaffed, and we need more people to make sure there isn't waste, fraud, and abuse, because people are doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing and able to fulfill requests from the PIA in a timely way. So yes, do we need more people to be able to respond to PIAs and to help agencies be more transparent? We do. We need more staff throughout the agencies for a variety of tasks. But my hope is that this kind of bill will actually help and empower some of our agencies and our local governments to get into the rhythm of putting things online so that they don't have to answer those requests, and working with people like the Compliance Board and Lisa so that they don't have to go file briefs in court, right? So that they can come up with solutions and resolutions earlier in the process so that there isn't so much, so that we don't take up the time that it takes to be in court every day.
Yeah. Deb, it looked like you were going to jump in. You want to say something?
I just want to add one thing to what Delegate Lierman said. There's kind of a flip side to the financial problem of agencies being understaffed, and that is the pressure on them to request incredibly unreasonable fees for providing responses to Public Information Act requests. And I am hoping that this bill and greater access to the Ombuds office and greater access to the Compliance Board will help rein in that tendency to, in some instances, frankly, to charge a very, very substantial fee as a deterrent to seeking the information and wanting the information. A lot of people are simply turned away by an unaffordable fee, and whether it's actually a reasonable fee or not is something that we, under this bill, would have a much easier road to sort out through the Ombuds office, and that will give the board the opportunity to litigate some complaints and speak to the issue of fees, what's reasonable, when fees should be waived, and so forth. And that's a very, very important aspect of what the bill will accomplish as well.
Yeah. So I'm just noticing that it's 10:46. I want to be mindful of our time. I'm going to ask our panelists about how the Public Information Act has been affected by the pandemic in terms of what you're seeing on the ground, and then we'll go around with closing statements. So anyone want to say something about how the pandemic is affecting their work in PIA? I know from a journalist standpoint, it's like some things have stopped. Some public bodies are still going on, but people aren't in the office. It sometimes feels like a black hole. Anyone else having?
I'll just say, I'll say sort of to close, this is such an important issue, even when there's not a pandemic going on, but when there is a crisis, that is, when there is a crisis, that's when people, I think, also realize just how important it is that the government is transparent about their actions. Whether it's how much did we pay for those test kits that we never used from South Korea, or, how has MDE completely stopped enforcing our clean water laws, show us what you've actually been doing. It's really important that we ask these questions and that we have answers and understand what our government is doing. And so I think the PIA is always important. Public information and transparency is always important. But I certainly have learned just how extremely important it is, especially during emergencies like the one that we're in right now. So I'm really glad to be working on this legislation with all of you and with Senator Kagan, who's such a champion on these issues, and look forward to hopefully, I hope that this is the year that we really strengthen our Public Information Act and say that, transparency wins in Maryland.
Thank you, Delegate Lierman.
And I echo, everything Delegate Lierman has said. I'm finding that, during times of crisis, people want to request or have access to information even more. And unfortunately, this is when, you're making a call and no one is answering the phone, or agencies are even less responsive. I think some jurisdictions have even gone so far as to, say that they're not going to respond to requests at all. So it has impacted the way that, Marylanders are able to navigate the process altogether.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
I would kind of underscore, as far as the PIA process is going, we're seeing much larger delays in responding, and we have had an increase in the number of matters that are going unanswered. That said, I will also say that we have a lot of heroes out there who are doing their level best to get to these requests and to do what they can to answer them. So these are very difficult conditions. And I thank Delegate Lierman and Senator Kagan and the Press Association for their leadership on these issues. I think it's important that we not lose sight of the fact that the problems we're seeing now may be magnified by the crisis, but they're not caused by them. They existed prior to this pandemic. And as Delegate Lierman was saying, we've had a problem with staffing in state government for quite some time. Hopefully, the kind of exigent conditions we have now has brought some of this to the fore. And I look forward to working with Delegate Lierman and Senator Kagan to try to solve some of these problems this session.
Absolutely. Deb, did you have anything you want to add?
3 great mic drops in a row? No, I got nothing else to add. I'm good.
Well, I want to thank all of you for spending time with us this morning on this extraordinarily important issue. I think government transparency is really not to be too cliche, but it's a cornerstone of our democracy. And if people do not have trust in the information that they're given, they will fill that void with other with misinformation and disinformation. And we need everyone to be committed to the idea of having open and equitable access to government information. And I do believe that these bills, House Bill 183 and Senate Bill 244, are important steps in that journey to equitable access to government information. So thank you all so much for joining us and allowing us to live stream. For those of you listening along, we are recording this and it'll be available on the MDDC YouTube channel and in other places throughout our world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.